Properties built before 1978 contained lead paint. In 1978, lead was removed from paint. The federal government passed some legislation that outlawed it, essentially, as part of painting products. This was done because lead leads to some pretty bad stuff, especially for young kids. And recently, there's been a lot of talk in small municipalities across the country about implementing new lead-based paint laws for their local communities and especially for rental properties. Well, I've been going through this in my market and just kind of wanted to touch on some of the implications on lead paint, what it can mean to your investment, and really some ways to prevent any kind of litigation and kind of protect yourself as an investor. So if you've got rental properties, you have an obligation to make sure that it's not going to endanger anybody. If one of those rental properties was built before 1978, the likelihood is there's lead-based paint in the house. Now, there's two different terms that are certifications, I'm going to say, to make sure that the house is safe. You've got lead-free, and this means that there is no lead anywhere in the house. It's not in the paint, it's not in the soil, it's nowhere to be seen. And then you have lead-safe. This simply means that any lead-based paint has been covered up by new paint. There's no chipping or curling edges to the paintwork in the house, and it's a safe environment. It's a good idea to get a lead-safe certificate prior to putting a tenant into a property, specifically if they have children under the age of 7. So if they're 6 or below that are going to be living there, it's a good idea to get a lead-based paint certificate. In many local communities, they've implemented having landlords necessarily get these lead safe certificates and having the property tested. I've had instances where I have a tenant in the property and their child comes up positive for lead. Well, in a situation like that, they're going to look everywhere because they want to make sure that their kid's safe. You and I would do the same thing. They start testing and start bringing people in, and in my specific instance, it wasn't even the building my building. It actually came from the daycare, but it put a big alarm going off in my head, making sure that I knew that these properties were safe for my tenants and safe for their kids. So getting a fairly inexpensive lead test on your properties prior to putting any young kids in there is a really good idea. The tests typically are going to cost anywhere from $150 to $500 to do a 3-bedroom house, and they take anywhere from a few days up to a few weeks to complete and get the results. But the peace of mind that you're going to get when you can hand a lead certificate to a tenant or to an inspector or somebody that's looking for any kind of lead, to point the finger at somebody, it goes a long way. So lead-based paint, though it's not a huge issue, it's something to consider if you have rental properties, and it's certainly something to consider if you've got rental properties that were built before 1978. Keep this in mind with your real estate investing and make sure you budget for it so that it's not an added expense that's going to cut into your bottom line.